Let's jump right into this explainer. We're tackling a massive paradox: evil and the power of active goodness.
If we're all born innocent, you gotta ask yourself, why is there just so much evil around us?
The answer might totally shock you.
Evil actually spreads because of passive good people. Seriously, if we just sit back, evil wins. We have to actively choose to spread the light. It's crazy, but every actively bad person literally starts out as someone who is just passively good. Look at Andalusia. They literally changed the world by building this glorious, scientifically advanced civilization. But then they got passive. Tragically, in Granada alone, 27 historic mosques were completely converted. Take the massive Cordoba Mosque. It's a stark reminder that passive goodness can totally destroy your legacy. So how do we fix this? Integrated knowledge. We must see the creator right there within the creation. This mindset naturally leads to true wisdom, which really just means putting everything exactly where it belongs. And to reach that ultimate truth, there are exactly 3 valid vessels laid out for us. But hey, screens aren't enough for this. We desperately need that active heart-to-heart connection of true conversation. Think about this. All the wealth on earth can't buy even a tiny fraction of genuine wisdom. Finding purpose is absolutely essential. Doing meaningless things goes against the entire reason for our creation. You already have the channels for this active wisdom inside you. Will you finally turn on the light? So let's just jump right into this explainer by confronting a massive, profound paradox about human nature and where suffering actually comes from. The source text we're analyzing today tackles a question that, honestly, philosophers and theologians have wrestled with for centuries. It asks, if every human being is born upon a pure, inherently good nature, like the text asserts, then why is the world so incredibly full of tragedy, oppression, and evil? I mean, where does it all come from? Welcome to the explainer. Today, we're uncovering a fascinating framework on the search for ultimate meaning. And as you'll see, we're exploring a pretty chilling warning about why simply being a quote-unquote good person might actually be dangerous for the future of humanity. All right, Section 1, the search for meaning. Let's get right into it. According to the source, the universe didn't just happen by accident. It was created with a very deliberate purpose. In this worldview, there's absolutely no such thing as meaninglessness in creation. In fact, the very word Allah equates to absolute meaning, and acting without purpose is framed as a literal injustice against the truth of creation itself. So finding the divine is fundamentally about finding your ultimate meaning. To actually achieve that connection, the text outlines exactly 3 valid paths. First, through understanding the beautiful names, or Asma-ul Husna. These are the divine attributes reflected in the world. Second, through prayer, or dua. And third, through righteous deeds, or amali salih. The text makes a really firm theological stance here. Inventing a 4th path, it isn't just a simple mistake. It's equivalent to trying to play God. These 3 paths are the established lifelines. Moving on to Section 2, integrating parts into the whole. This is where it gets really interesting, because the text brilliantly redefines what it actually means to be truly knowledgeable. It uses 2 distinct concepts. First, you have the bilgin or bilgich, basically the data gatherer. This person accumulates information but only sees the disconnected parts. Kind of like someone endlessly doom-scrolling, right? Acting like a human search engine. Sure, they're smart, but they lack vision. On the flip side is the alim, the true scholar. The alim doesn't just collect data, they integrate all those little parts into the ultimate whole. This is a concept known as tawhid, or unity. The speaker argues that knowledge that doesn't unify, knowledge that just fractures our understanding, well, that isn't true wisdom at all. Which brings us to Section 3, the danger of passive goodness. Okay, so let's circle back to our big opening question. If we are born pure, and if we're supposed to seek meaning and unity, why does evil thrive so successfully? Well, the speaker makes a bold, incredibly urgent claim here. Passive, good people have no future. It's a heavy thought. According to the source, the tragedies of the world are not actually born from the wicked. If you're out there pointing fingers at the bad guys, you're missing the root cause. The true enabler of evil, it's the inaction of the passively good. The source outlines this chilling progression of how a society decays. Watch how this works. It starts with the passive good. People who are personally moral but do absolutely nothing to stop injustice. Because they don't intervene, they slowly become desensitized and transition into being bad. Over time, without the resistance of active goodness, they eventually become the active bad. The text insists that if good people were actively good, they would intervene early, stopping the passive good from ever turning into the active bad in the first place. It is a stunning indictment of just standing on the sidelines. Section 4. The Tragedy of Andalusia. This is a heartbreaking historical case study that proves this point. See, when a society is driven by active goodness, it produces literal civilization-level achievements. Andalusia wasn't just a place on a map, it was the intellectual beacon of the world. The source passionately lists its legacies. It birthed the first major universities. It gave us intellectual giants, think Ibn Rushd, Ibn Khaldun, al-Qurtubi. It gave us Ibn al-Baytar, a founding father of botany, and al-Idrisi, who mapped the entire globe on a silver sphere. I mean, this was a peak human civilization built on active intellectual and spiritual engagement. But the speaker points out a devastating historical reversal. Because of a slow slide into passive goodness, because society stopped actively protecting its core values and its unity, everything was lost. In the magnificent city of Granada, the text highlights a staggering, heartbreaking statistic. All 27 of its beautiful mosques were converted into 27 churches. An absolute, complete erasure of a civilization's spiritual infrastructure. And the physical representation of this inaction, it's still there today. The Great Mosque of Cordoba, an architectural masterpiece originally designed to hold 32,000 worshippers at once, now stands as a massive, haunting museum. The text warns that today, Islamic prayer is strictly forbidden inside its walls. The speaker uses this to really hammer home the point. This is exactly what happens when good people decide it's enough to just be passively good. History simply does not forgive inaction. So, how do we fix this? Section 5. Seeking true wisdom, or hikmet. How do we prevent history from repeating itself? How do we break this cycle of decay? Well, the source emphatically says it's by seeking hikmet, and this definition is absolutely vital to the whole framework. Hikmet, or wisdom, is not defined as just knowing a bunch of things. The text defines it as the active process of putting a thing in the exact place the divine intended for it. It is an action. Conversely, doing the opposite, taking things out of their rightful place, that is the literal definition of oppression and injustice. So, just reading books, or even watching explainers like this one, it isn't enough. The speaker insists that gathering information is entirely useless if you don't possess the consciousness to recognize its value and the willpower to actually act upon it. You could memorize an entire library, but without action and consciousness, you can't hold on to that knowledge. It will slip right through your fingers, just like the civilization of Andalusia slipped away. Which leads us to Section 6, the power of sohbet. So how is this active wisdom actually transmitted across time to prevent civilizational decay? It's through the power of sohbet, or spiritual conversation. The early companions were raised not by reading texts alone, but through a dynamic heart-to-heart energy transfer. The speaker outlines 3 really powerful dynamics here. First, insibag, which means being dyed or colored with the divine color. Second, inkizab, a magnetic pull, a spiritual attraction that draws you in. And third, inikas, which is a profound reflection of character passed directly from the teacher to the student. I mean, consider the difference here. Reading books or looking at screens, that's just an object-based transfer. It's just moving data from paper to your brain. But the sohbet tradition is a living transmission. It's heart-to-heart, face-to-face. This is exactly why you can't just absorb this kind of transformative knowledge in isolation. True learning, true hikmet, demands a profound human connection, where living ethics are transmitted right alongside the facts. To emphasize the timeless nature of this transmission, the speaker shares a prophetic tradition. It states that those who hear the knowledge must pass it to those who didn't. But you know what the truly fascinating part of this quote is? The implication that someone hearing this message centuries later, maybe even thousands of years later, might actually understand its depth and apply it even better than those who originally heard it. It's an awe-inspiring call to action for every single generation to step up and become the new carriers of this active wisdom. To wrap up this explainer, I'm leaving you with a direct challenge, presented by the source material itself. The speaker explicitly says this knowledge is a project of transformation. If you are perfectly satisfied with your current state, well, this framework isn't for you. But if you recognize you need to change, you have to take action. Because true transformation requires you to change your inner state first, so that the divine can change your future. So the big question is, what will you do with this knowledge to transition from being merely passively good to actively shaping a better world?
You assume the ultimate goal of any divine message, any absolute truth passed down to humanity, would be crystal clear, unmistakable clarity.
Right, like a literal blueprint.
Yeah, exactly. You assume it would read like an instruction manual, like tab A goes into slot B, turn the wrench clockwise to achieve salvation.
Right.
We naturally crave that kind of binary precision because, well, it's comforting. We want to be told exactly what to do, where everything goes, and what everything means so we can just follow the steps and get on with our lives.
It's the path of least resistance, really.
Exactly. But what if a universe that comes with a perfectly clear, unambiguous instruction manual is actually a trap?
Oh, wow. That's a heavy thought.
Right. What if providing you with pure, unfiltered certainty fundamentally ruins the very intellect you were given to perceive that universe in the first place?
Which forces you to completely reevaluate the entire purpose of the text. I mean, if you're looking for a user agreement, you can just scroll to the bottom of and click accept without reading.
Which we all do.
Oh, absolutely. But if you do that, you're interacting with the world in a purely transactional way. Like, give me the data. I'll input the data. I get the result.
Yeah.
But stepping into the realm of profound philosophy, into theology, into the architecture of meaning itself demands something entirely different. It demands a struggle.
That's probably.
It demands an active participant who is willing to be confused, to wrestle with ambiguity, and to essentially build the map while actively walking the terrain.
Okay, let's unpack this because that concept is the absolute bedrock of what we are diving into today. We are jumping straight into the deep end of some incredibly demanding source material.
Demanding, yeah.
We are looking at excerpts from a deeply philosophical lecture series, specifically the 9th lesson on the Asma-ul Husna, which translates to the beautiful names of Allah, delivered by the speaker, Mustafa İslamoğlu.
Right.
Now, if you are listening to this deep dive, you are someone who wants the underlying architecture of how things work. You want the deep understanding without the overwhelm.
And this material definitely delivers on that.
It really does. Our mission today is not just to summarize a religious text or walk you through a theological table of contents. We are extracting a massive, sweeping framework for human epistemology.
Exactly.
We are looking at how we acquire knowledge, the psychological tools we use to find our center of gravity in the cosmos, and the terrifying historical reality of why simply deciding to be a good person in your private life is nowhere near enough to stop civilizations from collapsing.
What's fascinating here is that the stakes established in this text are just monumental. It's vital to understand right out of the gate that we aren't just dealing with a list of dogmatic rules.
Right. It's not a list of do's and don'ts.
No, not at all. The source material is fundamentally concerned with the epistemology of meaning. It's an investigation into how we know what we know and whether the knowledge we gather actually serves a purpose.
Okay.
The central thesis we'll be exploring is that true knowledge must inherently pull things together. It must lead to unity.
Unity.
Yeah, and if you are acquiring massive amounts of information and the only result is that your worldview becomes more fractured, more divided, and more isolated, well, the text argues you have fundamentally misunderstood the assignment of being human.
That's a massive claim. So let's start with the prerequisite for even engaging with this kind of knowledge, because the text poses a fascinating structural question about the Quran itself.
It does.
It asks a question that challenges that instruction manual expectation we just talked about. The source asks, why does this divine text utilize a dual system of verses?
Right, the two types.
Yeah, why are there verses called mukamat, which are described as clear, straightforward, and mutually confirming living side by side, with verses called mutashabi, which are deliberately ambiguous, multi-layered, and require immense intellectual labor to decipher?
And the presence of the mutashabi, those ambiguous verses, is essentially the ultimate cognitive filter.
A cognitive filter. I like.
If you think about it from a psychological standpoint, an entirely clear 100% mukamat text wouldn't require a mind.
Wait, really? It wouldn't require a mind?
No, it would only require a nervous system to execute commands, just stimulus and response.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
By weaving ambiguity into the very fabric of the message, the text is intentionally creating friction. It is forcing the reader to stop, to doubt their initial assumptions, and to engage their higher reasoning.
So it's deliberate.
Completely deliberate. The source material provides a brilliant, empowering answer to why this duality exists. It is there to force the audience to actively engage their own intellect.
It's an active rebellion against passive consumption. And the text uses a phrase that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. It issues a severe warning against approaching any profound truth with what it calls a rented mind.
A rented mind. It's a devastating critique of how most people operate today.
It really is.
The text is demanding that you use the specific, unique intellect that was installed inside you. It essentially says, do not approach external revelation with a mind you've outsourced to someone else. You must use your internal revelation, your reason to process the external one.
Think of a rented mind like a furnished apartment.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, it is so unbelievably easy to just move into someone else's opinions. The couch is already positioned perfectly in front of the TV. The worldview is completely set up and decorated for you.
You don't have to lift a finger.
Exactly. Maybe that apartment was furnished by your political party or by the specific algorithm of the social media platform you use or by the societal norms of your particular zip code. You just walk in, sit down, and start living there.
And it feels good, right? It feels safe.
It feels incredibly safe. You get all the comfort of feeling like you understand the world, but you don't actually own the furniture. You didn't build the house. You didn't lay the foundation. You are a passive tenant in your own intellect.
And living in that furnished apartment means you have entirely bypassed the struggle of creation. And therefore, you have bypassed the acquisition of actual wisdom. To reinforce this, the source material brings in a quote from an ancient mystic and thinker named Haris al-Muhasibi.
Okay, what did he say?
The quote is incredibly bold. Muhasibi says, "The intellect is the Quran, and the Quran is the intellect."
Whoa, that feels like a radical equation to make, to elevate human intellect to the same plane as the divine text itself.
It is radical.
Yeah.
And the speaker in our source material clearly feels the weight of that statement. He notes that a thinker who reaches that level of realization deserves to have his feet kissed.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a profound level of reverence for the human capacity to reason. But the text immediately follows this up with a very real historical sorrow.
What kind of sorrow?
It points out that in later generations, thinkers who possessed this kind of active intellect, people who push boundaries and refuse to rut their minds, were frequently labeled as infidels or kafir by their own societies.
Because society always fears the person who starts building their own furniture.
Exactly.
A society built on rented minds is predictable. It's controllable. When someone walks in and says, actually, the intellect and the revelation are mirrors of each other, and I am going to use my mind to interrogate this, well, that threatens the landlords of the furnished apartments.
It absolutely threatens the status quo of passive compliance. But the source material is adamant that the active intellect has a vital, non-negotiable social purpose.
Right.
Knowledge isn't meant to be a private trophy. It must call toward vadet, an Arabic term meaning unity or oneness.
Unity.
Yes. If you are using your intellect, it should be synthesizing the chaos of the world into a coherent, unified whole.
So if the goal is vadet, unity, then the text must define the opposite. What happens when knowledge fails to do that?
The source draws a sharp line there. It argues that if your knowledge only leads to tefrika, which means division, separatism, or splitting things apart, then that knowledge is utterly useless.
Useless.
Yes. It uses this visceral metaphor describing divisive knowledge as a stone sitting in the mind of the person who holds it.
A stone sitting in the mind. Man, that's heavy.
It's dead weight. It doesn't nourish anything. It doesn't grow. It just occupies space and drags you down.
Yeah.
If your accumulated facts and data only serve to divide people, to categorize everything into isolated, disconnected fragments, it hasn't benefited you. And if it hasn't benefited you, the text asks, how could it possibly benefit society?
It couldn't.
Right. True knowledge, the kind that rejects the rented mind, is the ability to see how the microscopic individual part connects to the macroscopic whole.
Okay, but that sets up a massive logistical problem for us, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if we accept the premise, we must reject the rented mind, we must seek unity, and we must avoid the stone in the mind of divisive knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
How do we actually do that? The active intellect needs scaffolding.
True.
It needs a methodology. I mean, if you just tell people to seek unity without giving them tools, they're just going to make things up and call it truth.
Which is dangerous, but the text anticipates that exact problem. It transitions from the how to the what. Understanding the whole, according to the source, means seeing the artist in the art.
Okay, I like that.
It means looking at a deed, the fi'l in Arabic, and being able to perceive the doer, the fail. Ultimately, it is the capacity to look at creation and perceive the creator. To achieve this, the text outlines a very rigid, specific architecture of valid tools.
Right. It provides exactly 3 valid paths, or means, which it calls the Vesaili Hakike, the genuine means to reach Allah and ultimate truth.
Exactly 3.
Yeah. First, the Esmâ Husna, the beautiful names or divine attributes we mentioned earlier. Second is dua, which is prayer or supplication. And the third is amali saliha, which translates to righteous, positive deeds.
And the rigidity you mentioned is crucial here. The text issues a severe theological warning immediately after defining those 3 paths.
What's the warning?
It states unequivocally that there is no 4th path. If a person attempts to invent a 4th means of reaching the divine, they are fundamentally attempting to put themselves in Allah's place.
Oh, wow. So they're playing God.
Essentially, yes. In the terminology of the text, they are committing shirk, which is polytheism, or the association of partners with the divine. By stepping outside the established architecture of names, prayer, and righteous action, you aren't being innovative. You are attempting to usurp the center of the universe.
Which leads perfectly into the psychological distinction the speaker makes about the types of people who pursue knowledge. There is a massive difference between someone who just collects data and someone who actually understands the universe.
A huge difference.
The text draws a sharp contrast between a bilgin and an alim. A bilgin is described as a knower, a data collector, a technician of facts. The text even hints they can be overly clever, or ukala.
Yeah, a bit arrogant in their knowledge.
Right. But an alim is a true scholar. The dividing line between them is scope. A bilgin only sees the relationships between the parts. An alim sees the parts' relationship to the whole.
And if you map that concept onto modern society, it serves as a profound indictment of our current intellectual landscape.
Oh.
Well, we live in a world entirely engineered by the bilgin. We reward the ultra-specialist. The bilgin is the researcher who spends 40 years examining a single protein within a leaf under an electron microscope.
Okay.
They know absolutely everything about that protein, but they are completely blind to the forest, the soil health, the watershed, and the sunlight. The alum, on the other hand, might also study the leaf, but they study it strictly to understand its precise role in the broader ecosystem.
I have to push back on this a little bit, or at least explore the tension here.
Sure, go ahead.
Because our entire modern economy and technological supremacy are built on hyper-specialization. We highly prize the bilgin. We need the person who only studies the protein to cure the disease.
That's true.
We need the engineer who only studies the tensile strength of one specific alloy to build the bridge. Is the text arguing that this modern hyper-specialization is actually a barrier to true wisdom?
That's a really fair question. But the text isn't anti-science or anti-specialization. You cannot understand the whole without intensely studying the parts. The tragedy, according to the source, isn't the act of studying the part. The tragedy is the failure to connect that part back to the whole.
Oh, I see.
When the bilgin cures a disease by studying a protein but fails to see how the pharmaceutical industry distributing that cure might be creating societal inequity, they have failed to connect the part to the whole. They have data, but they have lost hikmet. They have lost wisdom.
Let's drill down into hikmet, because the text gives wisdom a very specific, almost geographic definition that completely strips away the mystical aura we usually associate with the word.
Yes, it defines wisdom as an act of placement.
Placement, like literally putting things down.
Exactly. For a human being, hikmet is the act of putting something exactly where Allah intended it to be. The speaker uses a wonderful evocative phrase saying that true wisdom makes you a merkez effendi, a master of the center.
Master of the center, I love that.
You develop the capacity to recognize the precise center of gravity for every single object, every action, every relationship, and every person, and you actively place them there. And the text mirrors this by defining divine wisdom for Allah. Wisdom is the act of creating a thing in its exact right place from the beginning.
So the universe isn't just a random scattering of atoms, it's an interlocking puzzle.
Right.
But the flip side of this definition is terrifying. If wisdom is putting things in their rightful place, the text defines the exact opposite of wisdom as zulum.
Yes, zulum.
Now, usually when we hear the word zulum, it is translated as oppression, tyranny, or cruelty. We picture a dictator, or warfare, or systemic violence. But the text points out that the linguistic root of zulum simply means to displace something from its rightful center.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it radically expands our understanding of what oppression actually is.
Yeah, it really does.
Yes, violence is zulum, but only as a symptom of a deeper cosmological crime. Oppression isn't just about inflicting physical pain. It is the crime of taking things out of their rightful context.
Let's play that out in the real world. Imagine taking a brilliant, highly skilled surgeon who wants to heal people and through some bureaucratic nightmare, forcing them to work as a data entry clerk.
Right.
By the definition of the text, that is zulum. You haven't physically hurt them, but you have displaced them from their rightful center.
Exactly.
Or look at the environment. Imagine taking a massive ancient forest that serves as the lungs for a region, clearing it out, and pouring concrete over it to build a shopping mall. You are displacing the natural balance. You are committing zulum.
It's a structural definition of cruelty. When you treat a human being like a machine to maximize corporate profit, you are taking them out of their rightful place. That is zulum. It is the ultimate failure of the Biljan who cannot see the whole. And the text makes it clear that a universe filled with zulum cannot sustain itself.
Which brings us to a massive pivot in the source material. We've been building this high-minded theoretical architecture about the rented mind, the active intellect, the tools of unity, and the definition of wisdom as placement.
Right. The theory.
Yeah. But then the speaker pauses the philosophical discourse and drops a stark, terrifying historical reality check right into the lap of the listener.
He essentially grabs the audience by the collar. He reminds them that the ultimate goal of these lessons is not to make them feel intellectually superior.
No.
The goal is entirely action-oriented. The explicit objective is to train people to become actively good. The speaker notes that his broadcast is reaching people from Kabul to Moscow, from Palestine to London.
It's a huge audience.
It's huge. And he issues a challenge. He tells his audience that if they are perfectly satisfied with their current state, if they just want a cozy spiritual feeling to help them sleep at night, they should stop watching immediately.
It's a radical transformation project. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the core argument driving this project challenges almost every assumption we have about how evil operates in the world.
It really does.
The speaker argues a highly provocative point. Bad things do not happen in the world because of evil people. Bad things happen because of good people. Specifically, what he calls passive good people.
And to back this up, the text establishes a baseline for human nature. It references Surah Rum, verse 30 of the Quran, stating that no human being is born evil.
Right.
Every single baby is born upon a pure, innate nature, a concept known as fitra. Therefore, evil is not original. It is not asli. Evil is acquired, it is accidental or aridsi.
I was reading this section and it immediately made me think of the human immune system.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, a virus representing evil is going to do what a virus is programmed to do. It's going to enter a host and try to multiply. You can't really be angry at the virus, it has no moral agency.
It's true.
The real tragedy, the actual systemic failure that kills the body, isn't the presence of the virus. It's when the white blood cells, the components designed to protect the system, just sit there passively and watch the virus multiply without intervening.
Wow. That physiological analogy maps perfectly onto the sociology of the text.
True.
Yeah, the text tracks the tragic progression of societal decay. It claims that every active evil person out there, the ones causing immense zulum in the world, started off as a passive good person. They were born on the fitra.
Okay.
Then, due to environment or circumstance, they slipped into being bad. And finally, they crystallized into being actively bad. But the critical failure point wasn't their transformation.
What was it?
The critical failure was that the good people around them were only good in private. If the good people had been actively good, they would have blocked the paths to evil. They would have functioned as the white blood cells of society.
When the white blood cells become passive, the host body dies. And the speaker refuses to leave this as an abstract theory. He provides a devastating historical proof of concept Andalusia.
Islamic Iberia, modern-day Spain.
Exactly. The speaker recounts visiting Andalusia, and he doesn't describe it as a fun tourist trip. He describes walking the streets with splinters in his heart.
He is tapping into a profound historical trauma. The text quotes an Arab poet, Ali el-Karam, who famously said, "No dead person has been mourned with as many tears as Andalusia."
A splinter in the heart.
It's a visceral bleeding wound for the speaker. Because what was lost in the fall of Andalusia wasn't just a patch of political territory on a map. It was the absolute pinnacle of human intellectual majesty.
The text lists the giants of this era to drive the point home.
We're talking about Ibn Rushd, Ibn Battuta, Ibn Khaldun, Ibn Hazm, Qurtubi.
Legends.
Yeah, this wasn't a society of passive clerics hiding in monasteries. This was a thriving, explosive civilization of alims, of true scholars who were actively connecting the parts to the whole and acting as masters of the center.
And the text makes sure to highlight that their active goodness manifested as massive scientific and cultural supremacy.
Like what?
Well, it specifically points to figures like Ibn al-Baytar, calling him the father of botany. This was a man who didn't just study plants, the text notes. He drew 220 distinct medical tools and actually invented half of them himself.
He invented them. Yeah, he was actively building the physical tools of healing.
And then there was al-Idrisi. The text notes that al-Idrisi didn't just draw a flat map on a piece of parchment. He created a spherical map of the world, a globe, cast out of solid lead.
Out of lead. That's incredible.
It was accurately mapping unknown geographies, mountain ranges, and trade routes at a time when a significant portion of Europe was still operating in the Dark Ages, terrified of sea monsters.
Right.
These were people whose pursuit of Vadet, of unity and wisdom, pushed the absolute boundaries of human capability.
They were the ultimate white blood cells. But then the text draws the heartbreaking contrast. It forces the listener to look at the reality of today.
There's a stark contrast.
The speaker notes that in Granada, the former crown jewel of this intellectual empire, there are currently 27 churches and 0 mosques. He brings up the Great Mosque of Cordoba.
The Pearl of the Earth. That's what it was called.
An architectural marvel that at its peak held 32,000 people praying together in its indoor space.
32,000 people.
Yeah. And today, the speaker laments, a person is not allowed to pray even 2 rakas, a brief, momentary prayer inside that space. It is a museum to a dead civilization.
So the question the text screams at the listener is, why did this happen? Did a sudden wave of insurmountable supernatural evil just wash over the Iberian Peninsula and destroy them?
No, not at all.
The text insists the collapse happened entirely from within. It happened because the good people became passive. The descendants of Ibn al-Baytar and al-Idrisi stopped inventing. The intellectual rigor faded. They started wrenching their minds. They became comfortable.
They enjoyed the furnished apartments their ancestors built, but they forgot how to build the furniture themselves.
Wow, yes.
It is a terrifying warning that civilizations do not die by murder, they die by suicide. When the good become complacent, the system rots from the inside out.
It's chilling.
It really is. To underline this, the text cites a core Quranic principle, a sociological law. Allah does not change the condition of a society until they change what is within themselves.
If the white blood cells decide to take a nap, the virus wins. The stakes we are dealing with here aren't just about achieving personal enlightenment or feeling good about yourself.
No, it's way bigger than that.
It is about the survival of knowledge, the prevention of zulm, and the maintenance of civilization itself. So, if we are terrified by the ghost of Andalusia, and we should be, how do we prevent this? How do we train ourselves to be actively good?
Well, the source argues that the only way to sustain an active immune system is to pursue something far more valuable than physical wealth or political power. We have to pursue hikmet, wisdom.
Wisdom.
Attaining this hikmet is the second major goal of the speaker's lessons. But we have to remember the definition we established earlier. This isn't just downloading more data into your brain.
Right, it's not being a Bilgin.
Exactly. The ability to make accurate judgments, to be a master of the center, requires immense consciousness, a drive for unity, and crucially, it requires amal action and lived deeds.
Amal.
Yes. If your wisdom is entirely theoretical, if it isn't lived out in the physical world, it cannot grow. It stagnates and becomes that stone in the mind.
The text actually does a fascinating grammatical breakdown of a specific Quranic verse to explain the mechanics of how we acquire this wisdom.
Oh, the Yesa verse?
Yes. The verse in question translates to, Allah gives wisdom to whom he wills. Now, on a surface level, that sounds like a passive lottery. The divine just randomly selects someone and zaps them with wisdom.
Right, like being struck by lightning.
But the source material analyzes the specific Arabic verb used in the text yesa, which translates to wills or desires. And it points out something incredibly empowering about the structure of that verb.
This raises an important question, actually, because it's a grammatical revelation. The text points out that the verb yesa functions in a way that looks at 2 subjects simultaneously.
2 subjects.
Yeah, it does not just mean that Allah wills the wisdom to be given in a vacuum. It implies, at the exact same time, that the human being actively desires to receive it.
Oh, wow. It's a reciprocal relationship. You have to want it to get it.
Exactly. It destroys the idea of spiritual fatalism. Wisdom is not something that happens to you while you are passively sitting on the couch in your rented mind.
Right.
It is a partnership. You must generate the gravitational pull of desire, and in response, the divine grants the wisdom.
And the value placed on this wisdom is absolute. The text states plainly that all the physical wealth in the world cannot buy a single handful of true wisdom. But a handful of wisdom can eventually buy all the wealth in the world.
It's the ultimate currency.
It is. And it notes, almost as a warning, that only thinking minds, what it calls ulbab, can actually grasp this value. If you don't have an active intellect, you'll look at wisdom and think it's worthless compared to a bag of gold.
But the speaker introduces a critical distinction here, one that addresses why so many people seem to gain knowledge only to lose it.
Okay, what's the distinction?
Grasping the value of something is only step one. The text differentiates between getting something and keeping it. It argues that raw brute force effort is usually enough to acquire a piece of knowledge. You can force yourself to study.
Sure.
But effort alone is never enough to keep it.
To keep it, you need consciousness. You have to possess a deep, abiding understanding of its absolute worth.
You lose wisdom the exact fraction of a second. You forget its immense worth. To illustrate this, the speaker gives a highly specific, culturally resonant example.
The memorizers.
Yes, he talks about individuals who dedicate 1.5 years, 3 years, sometimes 4 years of their lives to memorizing the entire Quran. In the tradition, this person earns the title of a hafiz, which literally translates to memorizer.
That required a staggering effort.
Incredible effort. But the speaker notes with real sadness, many of these individuals eventually forget what they memorized.
Why do they forget? They clearly had the work ethic.
The text answers this by drawing a line between a hafiz, a memorizer, and a muhafiz, which means a guardian or a protector.
A guardian.
The people who forgot the text treated it like a massive data download. They memorized the phonetic syllables, they passed the test, they got the title, but they never became guardians of the meaning.
Wow.
They didn't truly grasp the profound, world-altering value of the wisdom they were holding in their minds, so the mind simply let it slip away.
You know, that concept, the memorizer versus the guardian, is painfully relatable to almost everyone listening to this right now. We all do this.
Oh, constantly.
Think about the modern education system. You spend 4 years of your life, you go tens of thousands of dollars into debt to get a college degree. You stay up all night memorizing historical dates or chemical formulas or economic theories.
Right.
You write the essays, you pass the final exams. But because you just wanted the piece of paper at the end, because you viewed the knowledge merely as a transaction to get a job, you didn't value the actual wisdom you were exposed to.
Exactly.
And what happens? You forget almost everything you learned the second you walk across the graduation stage. We were all trained to be memorizers. Very few of us were trained to be guardians.
That is precisely the dynamic the text is exposing. If you do not revere the knowledge, it will evacuate your mind. It ties directly back to the concept of the rented mind.
You rented the data long enough to pass the test, but you refused to buy the house.
Perfect way to put it.
So this presents us with another massive logistical challenge. If true wisdom requires this constant active maintenance, this lived action, and this deep conscious reverence to survive, well, how on earth does humanity keep it alive?
It's the multi-generational question.
Right. How is it transmitted across generations without degrading into mere data?
That leads us to the third core goal of the lessons outlined in the text, the absolute necessity of sustaining the Sohbet tradition. Sohbet roughly translates to discourse, companionship, or conversation, but it implies a very specific, deeply intimate kind of mentorship. The text points out a historical reality. The Prophet's companions, the Sahaba, were not raised and educated by reading books in a silent library.
They were raised through Sohbet.
Exactly. To emphasize why this human-to-human transmission is necessary, the text draws a very sharp, almost brutal line between the messengers who are mortal and the message, the Risalah, which is immortal.
And it does not shy away from the visceral physical fragility of the messengers.
No, it doesn't.
It explicitly notes that the Prophet Muhammad was a mortal man who passed away. It brings up the horrifying death of Prophet Yahya, known as John the Baptist, who was beheaded. It mentions Prophet Zechariah, who, according to tradition, was sawed in half.
That's brutal.
It talks about Prophet Ayub or Job, suffering through severe debilitating illness. The physical bodies of the men carrying the message are fragile, temporary, and easily destroyed.
The physical vessel dies, but the Risalah, the message, must survive. And the text says it lives on through the scholars, through ulema, who are designated as the true inheritors of the prophets.
But stepping into that role, becoming a guardian capable of transmitting this knowledge, is grueling.
It's not easy.
The text says it requires immense holistic effort. It demands the sweat of the heart, the sweat of the mind, and the sweat of the brow.
It's not an armchair philosophy, and the text notes that society has a massive responsibility in this transmission process. It uses an almost economic phrasing to describe the sociology of knowledge. Skills are subject to complement. Goods without customers are lost.
Goods without customers are lost.
Yeah. If a society stops valuing deep thinkers, if it stops complimenting the alim and only rewards the bilgin, it will stop producing deep thinkers. The market for wisdom will crash.
So how do those few remaining deep thinkers actually transmit what they know?
This is where the text makes a striking comparison that feels like a direct, unavoidable challenge to our modern way of life.
Okay, I'm ready.
It states that one single hour of sohbet, this intimate heart-to-heart discourse, can give a person what 10 volumes of written books cannot. Because books, and by extension, screens and monitors, are inanimate objects.
Right.
Sohbet is a living, breathing human exchange. It is described as heart-to-heart, face-to-face, knee-to-knee.
The text notes that in the ancient tradition, if you wanted to know if someone was wise, you didn't ask for their resume. You didn't ask, what prestigious university did you get your diploma from?
Right, the piece of paper.
Yeah, instead you asked a much more intimate, demanding question. Whose knee did you sit by? Whose discipline did you pass through? Because true knowledge must be absorbed alongside ethics. It must be taken with a lack.
And the speaker states a rule that we would do well to remember in the age of artificial intelligence.
Oh, definitely.
Knowledge taken without ethics, knowledge separated from human morality, isn't science, and it isn't wisdom, it is just data. And data without ethics is what leads to zulum.
Okay, I have to stop you there and push back on this because we are facing a massive paradox right now.
Oh, so?
We are literally sitting here transmitting knowledge to an audience through recorded audio. The listener isn't in the room with us. Furthermore, the speaker in the source material explicitly noted he was broadcasting his lessons via screens to people in London and Moscow.
Right. He's using the technology.
Exactly. So is the text implying that podcasts, books, digital archives, and remote learning are fundamentally inferior? Are we saying that if you aren't physically sitting knee to knee in a room with a mentor, you can't acquire wisdom?
It's the essential question for our era. But the text is not rendering modern media useless. As you pointed out, the speaker is actively utilizing it to reach Moscow and London.
Right.
But the text serves as a profound warning against reducing the entirety of your intellectual life to digital data transfer. When you only interact with screens, you are receiving information, but you risk missing the human ethic, the alak, that tempers and contextualizes that information.
So you need both.
Exactly. To explain why the physical room matters, the text breaks down sohbet into 3 distinct psychological powers that are incredibly difficult to replicate through a screen.
Let's walk through those 3 powers, because they explain the mechanics of mentorship perfectly.
The first power of sohbet is insaibag, which means dyeing or coloring.
Like literally dye.
Yeah, think of dipping a piece of white cloth into a vat of rich indigo dye. When you pull it out, the cloth is fundamentally permanently changed. The text specifically refers to being dyed with the color of Allah, sibgat Allah, which it describes as the permanent original color of the universe.
Oh, wow.
Sitting in the presence of a true teacher, observing how they handle frustration, how they treat the person serving them tea, how they embody their knowledge, it permanently dyes your character in a way reading their book never could.
You absorb the subtext of their humanity.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. What's the second power?
The second is insizap, which means attraction or gravitational pull.
Gravitational pull.
We've all experienced this. When you are in the physical presence of someone with immense charisma, lived wisdom, and deep discipline, their sheer mass pulls you into their orbit.
Yeah, you just want to be around them.
Right. Their presence exerts a gravitational force that actively pulls you out of your own bad habits and petty distractions. You want to be better just because they're in the room.
And the third power?
The third is inikas, which means reflection. It is the ability to see the truth mirrored back to you.
And this is where the speaker draws the line with digital media. He notes that watching a lecture on a screen only gives you the third power. It only gives you the inikas.
Just the reflection.
Yeah, it's a mirror. It is incredibly useful for transmitting facts, but it is flat. Being in the physical room, engaging in true sohbet, is what provides the gravitational pull to change your habits and the permanent dye to change your character.
Precisely. But the text doesn't want the listener to fall into historical despair over this. It recognizes a common psychological trap.
Which is?
Well, a person listening today might think, well, I wasn't born 1,400 years ago. I didn't get to sit knee to knee with the prophet or the great scholars of Andalusia. I am stuck in the modern world with screens and books, so I guess I am inherently at a disadvantage.
I mean, it's easy to feel that way.
It is. But the text actively combats the sense of loss. It references a profound statement from the prophet himself, who told his immediate companions that they must pass the message on. Why? Because, he noted, someone 10, 50, 500, or even 2,500 years in the future might actually possess a deeper, more profound understanding of the message than the person who originally heard it with their own physical ears.
That is a staggering concept, the idea that time does not inevitably degrade the message.
Right.
If the intellect is applied, time might actually ripen the understanding of the message. We have centuries of history, science, and human experience to contextualize the text in ways the original audience couldn't even fathom.
It shatters the idea that proximity to truth is strictly chronological. The text offers a beautiful title for people who realize this. It allows people living today to become companions of the modern age.
Companions of the modern age, I love that.
You bridge the gap of time through deep understanding and active goodness.
So let's look at the massive, sweeping architecture we've built over the course of this deep dive.
It's been a journey.
It really has. We started by learning that we must reject the passive rented mind and activate our own intellect. We learned that to avoid displacing the universe and committing zulum, we must use specific tools to connect the microscopic parts to the macroscopic whole.
Right.
We look at the tragic ghost of Andalusia to prove that if good people become passive, the societal immune system collapses. We understand that we must furiously pursue hikmet, not just memorize data like a hafiz, but guard it like a muhafiz. And we know we must transmit this wisdom through the human connection of sobat.
And all of those concepts, as massive as they are just the foundational layers. They are the mechanic.
Right. And all of it culminates in the core thesis of this entire 9th lesson. After building all this architecture, the text arrives at the ultimate search. It states a profound, brutally simple equation. Allah means meaning.
Yes, Allah demek anlam demektir. The text argues that the absolute, undeniable purpose of the universe's creation is meaning itself.
Meaning itself.
To prove this, it points out a fascinating theological concept regarding the physical laws of the universe. Physical laws, like the law of gravity or thermodynamics, are generally fixed, but they can actually be changed or overridden by divine miracles.
Because Allah is the ruler of his laws, not a prisoner of them.
Exactly. But the text asserts there is one single law that never, ever changes, not even for a miracle, and that is the law of purposefulness and meaning.
To illustrate this, the text contrasts two massive Quranic concepts, batil and haq. Now, in basic translations, we often read batil as false and haq as true.
Right, the simple binary.
Yeah, but the text deepens the etymology here. It equates batil directly with meaninglessness and purposelessness. It uses another term, malayani, which refers to empty, useless, distracting pursuits.
And conversely, it equates haq truth with being fundamentally meaningful and purposeful. This creates a radical ethical framework.
It really does.
Engaging in meaningless, empty things isn't just a harmless waste of a Tuesday afternoon. The text frames engaging in Malayani as an act of cruelty against truth itself. Abandoning empty things, consciously rejecting the meaningless, is considered the absolute perfection of faith.
So when a person feels a deep sense of existential dread, when they feel disconnected and complain that the divine feels impossibly far away, the problem isn't geographical distance.
No, not at all.
The text reminds the listener of the famous verse that Allah is closer to us than our own jugular vein. The source describes this relationship as a reciprocal verb, and isteshli feel. It asks a piercing, uncomfortable question. Allah is close to you, but are you close to Allah?
And it provides the psychological diagnosis for why we create that distance. It says that forgetting oneself is the root cause of forgetting the Creator.
Forgetting oneself.
Yes. If you don't know who you are, if you're living comfortably in the furnished apartment of a rented mind, mindlessly consuming Malayani distractions, you become completely alienated from your own innate nature. And if you are alienated from your own nature, you are alienated from the divine meaning.
So what does this all mean? How do we bridge that gap? How do we remember ourselves?
Well, we return to the tools we discussed in Section 2, the Esmâ Husna, the beautiful names.
Right, the names.
But here, at the climax of the text, the speaker uses an incredible, visceral modern metaphor to explain how they work. He describes these divine names as cables or channels that Allah has literally extended into the core of humanity.
Cables.
Cables. Attributes like the Creator Halik, the Seer Basir, the Hearer Sami, the Knower Alim, and the Wise Hakim. The text asserts that every single one of these divine attributes has a reflection, a physical connection point placed inside of us.
It is a stunning, deeply empowering metaphor to conclude on. The text literally states that Allah has installed the wiring and the sockets for every one of his beautiful names inside the human being. The infrastructure for greatness is already there. You were born with it wired into your fit drive.
It's all built in.
I absolutely love this light bulb metaphor because it perfectly synthesizes every single complex philosophical point we've wrestled with today. Allah provides the infrastructure. The wiring is already in the walls. The sockets, representing your innate capacity to be wise, to be a creator, to be a seer of truth, to be an active force for unity, are built into your spiritual DNA.
Right.
But human agency is the deciding factor. The act of goodness we talked about, the grueling pursuit of wisdom, the rejection of the rented mind, the refusal to be passively good while Andalusia burns, all of that is you, the human being, taking a light bulb in your hand and actively screwing it into the socket.
If we trace this back to the very first moments of our analysis, we can finally understand why the rented mind is so catastrophic.
Why is that?
A rented mind fails because it has outsourced its agency. It cannot generate its own meaning, therefore it cannot screw in its own light bulbs.
Ah, exactly.
And the tragedy of passive goodness, the reason the white blood cells fail and civilizations collapse happens because people get tired and let the light bulbs burn out. They stop maintaining the connection. The active daily pursuit of haq, of meaning, is the ultimate rejection of batil, of the empty, the distracting, and the meaningless.
What an incredible, demanding journey through this text. Let's quickly synthesize the map we've just drawn together.
Good idea.
We began by rejecting the comfort of the rented mind, realizing that our intellect isn't a passive storage unit for isolated facts that sit like stones in our head. We explored the deep structural difference between the data-obsessed Bilgin and the wisdom-seeking Alim who understands how the leaf connects to the forest.
We saw the tragic ghost of Andalusia, realizing that civilizations don't fall to external evil. They collapse when the good people become passive and allow the immune system to die.
We unpacked the necessity of seeking hikmet, understanding that we must guard knowledge as a muhafiz, rather than just memorizing it for a fleeting reward. We saw the irreplaceable, permanently dying power of human-to-human sobit over mere digital reflections.
And finally, we arrived at the ultimate realization that our deepest, most profound purpose is to plug our actions into the infrastructure of meaning that is already wired into our very nature.
It is a framework that asks a tremendous amount of the listener. It demands active, conscious engagement in literally every aspect of your life.
It really does. It's a lifelong project.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your daily routine. We live in an age of absolute, infinite, overwhelming data.
Oh yeah, nonstop.
We have endless algorithmic social media feeds, a constant barrage of breaking news, an ecosystem designed to keep us scrolling forever. Based on the rigorous architecture we've unpacked today, this text would likely categorize a vast majority of our digital consumption as pure Maliani, empty, meaningless pursuits that are essentially an act of cruelty against your own limited time on this earth.
That's a sobering thought.
So tomorrow morning, when you open your phone and begin to consume your first piece of information for the day, ask yourself a question. Is this just more isolated data? Am I just adding another dead stone to the field of my rented mind?
Or am I using this knowledge to actively screw a light bulb into one of the sockets of my deeper purpose, trying to illuminate the dark spaces around me?
It ultimately comes down to whether you are willing to do the hard work of building your own map, or if you're going to keep waiting for an instruction manual that doesn't exist.
That's the real choice.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it helped you build your map just a little bit further. Until next time, keep thinking actively.
Welcome to The Critique. Today we're examining a philosophical text exploring the spiritual framework of Esma'ul Husna, active goodness, and holistic wisdom. You have a profound grasp of these concepts, but we need some structural refinement to really maximize their impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the intellectual depth here is staggering. But navigating it right now feels a bit like driving a high-performance car with a slipping transmission.
Right, so a key theme running through this material seems to be the unity of knowledge. You open with that brilliant reference to Horace al-Muhasibi about intellect and revelation and the absolute necessity of butunlaştır, or, integration.
Which is such a powerful concept. But right now reading it is kind of like looking at a beautifully crafted mosaic where the individual tiles are striking, but the grout lines are too thick and it distracts from the overall image.
That's a great analogy. The material presents a profound array of theological concepts, but the structural transitions between these ideas occasionally obscure the core overarching message.
Exactly. The weakness is really in how we move from the epistemology of the Quran and the intellect straight into those numbered lists of the fourth B for integration and then...
The three valid means, right. Jama, Isma, and Sali-Amal.
Yeah. And then it just abruptly jumps into the historical tragedy of Andalusia.
It's jarring. It creates this really disjointed reading experience where the central premise, which is human transformation through the names of Allah, just gets temporarily lost in the shuffle.
Is the connection between the theoretical unity of knowledge and the practical application of active goodness fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
It definitely needs bolstering. So the suggestion here is to reorganize the narrative to use the concept of integration, bütünleşte, not just as a topic of discussion, but as the actual structural framework of the piece itself.
Oh, okay, so ensuring every single subtopic clearly, inevitably anchors back to this idea of holistic understanding.
Yes, exactly. So for some concrete examples, instead of introducing the Andalusian tragedy as a standalone point about passive goodness later on, frame it explicitly as the historical consequence of failing to integrate knowledge and action.
I love that. You use it to show what actually happens when bütünleştır just collapses.
Right, and you apply that same structural spine to the spiritual mechanics. When discussing the three true means to reach Allah, explicitly tie them to how they facilitate this integration of parts into the whole.
Right. So showing the reader how seeing the artist in the art directly combats spiritual passivity.
Yeah, you don't just list them as the three means. You frame them as the very mechanisms of integration that could have, saved a civilization like Andalusia.
By doing that, the concept goes from being something you're merely talking about to the actual lens through which the reader experiences the whole text.
Which naturally pushes us to evaluate what's actually at stake here. Building on the need for that structural integration, we have to decide which specific piece of the mosaic should anchor the entire text.
The psychological and sociological implications of that passive versus active goodness argument are massive. I mean, it challenges our whole modern conception of what makes a good person.
Okay, so what I really like about this part is the intense emotional weight of the historical example. You paint an incredibly vivid picture of the fall of Andalusia.
Oh, it's visceral. The way you describe the intellectual giants Ibn Rushd, Ibn Khaldun, and the inventor of, 220 surgical tools?
Yeah, and the creators of the first globe. And then you deliver this devastating contrast about the 27 magnificent mosques in Granada turned into churches.
Where today, not even 2 rakats of prayer can be performed. It's incredibly moving.
It really is. But the distinction between active and passive goodness provides a highly original and compelling lens, yet its current placement diminishes its potential impact.
Yeah, the weakness is that this striking, provocative argument that bad things happen because of passive good people is currently buried deep in the middle of a discussion about the 3 goals of the lessons.
Exactly. It's treated almost like a supporting footnote to a broader, more academic point.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of making the Andalusian tragedy the inciting incident for the reader, rather than a supporting historical footnote?
That's exactly the suggestion here. Elevate the active good concept from a secondary lesson objective to the central driving tension of the entire piece, using it as your primary hook.
Is there a risk, though, that putting the destruction of Andalusia at the very beginning creates an overly pessimistic tone? For a piece that's ultimately about spiritual awakening?
It's a heavy start, for sure, but it creates absolutely necessary stakes. For concrete examples, you could open your material with the provocative claim that evil spreads not because of bad people, but because of passive goodness.
Right, utilizing the Andalusian example right away to grip the reader by the collar.
Yes. You present the theological premise that no one is born evil, that everyone is born on the pure fitra, so evil is an accident. It only grows because good people choose to remain passive.
That completely changes the gravity of the entire essay. We aren't just learning about the names of Allah in a theoretical vacuum anymore. We're learning about them to survive.
Exactly. You hit the reader with that heavy reality right at the start. Then, you present your subsequent theological concepts, the study of Asma-ul Husna, attaining hikmet, the Sopit tradition, as the specific, actionable antidotes to this civilizational passivity.
If the reader understands that passivity destroys civilizations, they are instantly desperate for the cure. And the text offers such deeply nuanced cures, too.
Like the definition of hikmet.
Yeah. Usually in English texts, this just gets vaguely translated as wisdom, which feels incredibly passive, but you define it as the kinetic ability to put things exactly where Allah intended them to be.
It's an active sorting of the universe. To be an active force for good, you inherently need hikmet. Otherwise, your active goodness might just be misplaced energy.
And you make it very clear that one only attains that level of hikmet by engaging with the Sobet tradition, the heart-to-heart transmission, rather than just, reading data off a screen.
Which forces us to look critically at how you're currently delivering these concepts. Having established a new, gripping anchor around active goodness, we have to address how the mechanical delivery of your remaining concepts might clash with this new tone.
For sure. Formatting and delivery are often overlooked in theological writing, but when you're dealing with the transmission of the soul, formatting becomes an issue of tone.
The reliance on multiple overlapping numbered lists disrupts the emotional resonance of the spiritual discourse.
The material makes a strong case for structured learning by highlighting these various numbered goals and means.
It does, but the weakness is that the text concurrently introduces the fourth B for integration, then transitions into the three true means Esma, Dua, and Salih Hamel, and then outlines the three goals of these lessons.
Having multiple intersecting numerical frameworks stacked on top of each other forces the audience into a rigid, highly analytical mindset.
Right. It detracts from the deeply reflective and spiritual tone intended by your profound discussion of how the word Allah correlates to the concept of meaning itself.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered whether the numbering is serving the author's intent or acting as initial scaffolding that should now be removed to let the spiritual narrative breathe.
It's definitely scaffolding that needs to be removed so the cathedral can be admired for its stained glass, not its steel beams. The suggestion here is to dissolve the rigid numerical structures in favor of fluid, thematic transitions that emphasize the symbiotic relationship between the concepts rather than their quantity.
So we move away from labeling things as goal 1, goal 2, means 3, and move toward a continuous, flowing exploration.
Yes, let's look closely at some concrete examples of how to implement this. Instead of explicitly stating, the second goal is attaining hikmet, you can seamlessly bridge the ideas.
Like writing, becoming an active force for good inherently requires hikmet, the ability to place things exactly where Allah intended.
Exactly. You show the reader that hikmet is the necessary, unavoidable vehicle for active goodness, rather than just an isolated item on a checklist.
And rather than listing the three vassils mechanically, you narrate them as an interconnected journey. We approach this unity through understanding the names, articulate our need through prayer, and manifest it in the world through righteous action.
That approach honors the deep tradition being discussed so much better. When you talk about sohbet, for instance, you make it brilliantly clear that the Sahaba were raised on it. It's an energetic spiritual transfer.
You argue that 10 volumes of a dense theological book cannot give you what 1 hour of sohbet gives you because books are static objects, but sohbet is an insibalgi.
Let's pause on that word, because your exploration of insibag is one of the strongest parts of the submission.
It really is.
You describe it as a dyeing with the colors of Allah. When you paint something, you're just covering the surface, and it chips away. But when you dye something, the very substance is changed.
You also describe it as an insizab, like a magnetic gravitational pull.
Yeah, and if you take a concept that beautiful, that deeply transformative, and you shove it into a bulleted list as goal number 3, You just completely strip it of its magic. You reduce a spiritual metamorphosis into a data point.
And your text actually warns against this very thing. You write that learning without the morals of learning just becomes data.
We want to avoid turning your own essay into mere data.
By removing the numbered lists, you allow the reader's mind to flow down these channels naturally, rather than stopping at artificial checkpoints.
The structure becomes organic to the material. And that is ultimately what transforms a good piece of writing into an unforgettable one. Let's recap the main points of our critique today to ensure you have a clear path forward.
Sounds good?
We started by looking at the structural integration of your disparate theological ideas. We suggest using the concept of integration, Butte and Lester, as the central spine of the essay.
Right, ensuring that every point you make about epistemology or history explicitly connects back to the necessity of holistic understanding.
Next, we tackled the angle and originality of your core thesis. The argument that passive goodness is responsible for the collapse of civilization is a massive, paradigm-shifting idea.
But keeping it buried in the middle diminishes its power. The actionable step there is to isolate the Andalusia narrative and your discussion of passive versus active goodness and move it to the very introduction. Use it to hook the reader immediately. Finally, we address the tone and style, specifically focusing on the delivery mechanism of your spiritual concepts. We strongly suggest dissolving the overlapping numbered lists.
Rewrite the transitions between the core concepts of hikmat, sobet, and Asma-ul Husna so they flow as natural, inevitable consequences of seeking active goodness.
Let the reader experience the journey of these ideas. If you allow the narrative to breathe, the profound spiritual weight of concepts like insabiq and insijab will hit the reader with the force they deserve. The raw material you've submitted here is nothing short of brilliant. I truly believe that if these structural and tonal shifts are made, this piece will not only inform its readers, it will genuinely transform how they view their own morality.
We warmly invite you to apply these structural and tonal edits and submit the revised material back in for further critique. We would absolutely love to see how this piece evolves. Because at the end of the day, when we look back at the ruins of Andalusia, we don't just want to mourn the silence of good people. We want to be the active force that ensures the engine of our own understanding is fully integrated.
Welcome to the debate. You know, when a massive bridge collapses or a towering skyscraper just suddenly falls, we instinctively look for a dramatic event.
Right, like an earthquake or a massive fire.
Exactly. A sudden catastrophic stress. We look for a highly visible, active force of destruction because, honestly, it makes the collapse comprehensible.
Yeah, it gives us a clear physical culprit. I mean, it is incredibly comforting to point at an external force and say, you know, that right there, that is what brought the building down.
It really is, but when you study the pathology of societal and spiritual collapse, that forensic model just completely falls apart. You realize the greatest structures, the most profound civilizations, and, frankly, the most complex human souls, they don't usually fall because an external force knocked them down. They fall because of a silent, internal rot. And today we are exploring a profound philosophical and historical question raised by an extensive lecture series on the Asma-ul Husna, the beautiful names of Allah, and Islamic philosophy.
It really comes down to a question of root causes. When a society, or even just an individual, loses their way, what is the ultimate culprit?
Exactly. Is the core crisis a failure of action? You know, is it the paralysis of good people? Because I will be arguing that societal decay is primarily driven by the shift from active goodness to passive goodness. Outward action and physical intervention aren't just secondary effects. They are the absolute critical priority.
And I will be arguing that the root cause of decay is fundamentally a failure of understanding. It is the loss of unifying meaning, or tawhid, and the fragmentation of knowledge. My position is that internal transformation, conceptual clarity, that must absolutely precede any external action.
Okay, so let's start with the source material's premise regarding human nature, because it is radically optimistic. The text asserts that no baby is ever born bad. Evil is not inherent to the human condition. It is not, as the text says, asli or essential.
Right. It is arzi,
Arzi.
accidental and acquired.
Exactly. Every single human being is born on a pure natural disposition, the fitrat. So the mechanical question we have to answer here is, if everyone starts out fundamentally good, how does evil ever manage to spread and just dominate an entire society?
How does the rot actually set in?
Yes. And the answer the material provides is pretty chilling. It spreads because good people become passive. It is the passive good who allow the active bad to flourish. Evil doesn't win by outsmarting the good, it wins by outacting them.
Look, I agree that the text highlights the tragedy of passive goodness, but we really have to look deeper at the underlying mechanism here. Why do those good people become passive in the first place? You are treating action as the independent variable, but I see action merely as a symptom of understanding.
How so? I mean, if I see someone being wronged and I do nothing, that's a failure of my will, not my understanding. I know it's wrong.
Do you? I mean, really? The text explicitly states Allah means meaning. Therefore, a lack of integrated holistic knowledge is the true root of decay. The material makes this brilliant distinction between a mere knower, basically a pedant, who only sees isolated facts,
Right.
and a true scholar who connects the part to the whole through the framework of divine unity.
But knowing the whole doesn't stop the immediate injustice.
Well, it dictates whether your response to that injustice has any actual value. If you do not see the creator in the creation, if you cannot see the artist in the art, any outward action you take is fundamentally aimless. The text argues that knowledge that doesn't unify actually leads to a form of intellectual idolatry, or shirk. It fractures reality. So when people become passive, it is because their internal reality is fractured. They no longer see how their action connects to the ultimate meaning.
Okay, let's ground this in reality, because the material uses a very specific historical tragedy to anchor this exact debate, and that is the fall of Andalusia. This wasn't just some minor political setback. This was the total collapse of a magnificent civilization.
It was the loss of an entire world.
Completely. We are talking about a society that produced immense achievements. They produced Ibn Rushd, Ibn Khaldun. They produced al-Idrisi, who literally cast a lead globe to map unknown geographies for the entire world.
Oh, wow. Right.
And they produced Ibn al-Baytar, the father of modern botany.
They were the undisputed intellectual center of the world.
They were, and practically speaking, they had incredibly advanced medicine, drawing over 220 surgical tools, half of which they invented themselves.
Yeah.
And architecturally, just think of the Great Mosque of Cordoba. It's an absolute pearl with a 32,000-person capacity. Yet today, as the text laments, you cannot even perform 2 simple units of prayer there.
It is a devastating image.
It really is. That civilization was entirely wiped out. And I look at this decay through the lens of a biological analogy. Think of a society as a biological immune system. Andalusia had built up this massive, unparalleled database of genetic knowledge. They had the greatest universities, the science, the philosophy, but even if the body has a perfect database of how to fight a pathogen, if the white blood cells, which in this analogy are the good people, if they become passive, the disease takes over and kills the host.
That assumes the white blood cells still recognize the disease, though.
Well, they must have. They were the most educated people on Earth. Andalusia didn't fall from a lack of knowledge or meaning. It fell because its white blood cells stopped actively fighting the infection. They lost their physical mandate.
I come at it from a different way. Your immune system analogy is clever, but immune cells don't fight out of courage or a sudden burst of action.
Okay.
They fight because they have the precise molecular intelligence to recognize the foreign pathogen. They have a deep biological knowing.
Are you saying Andalusian scholars just forgot what oppression looked like?
I am saying the society lost its internal compass. The fall of Andalusia stems from a breakdown in the transmission of consciousness, not just a lack of physical resistance. You mentioned their vast database of knowledge, and the intellectual output was staggering, sure. But the material emphasizes that taking knowledge without its accompanying morality, without its living transmission, turns profound wisdom into mere data.
So you're pointing to the breakdown of the Sohbet tradition?
Exactly. The text highlights the vital importance of sohbet, which is the knee-to-knee, heart-to-heart transmission of meaning from a living scholar.
It argues that society fell because people transitioned from being protectors of meaning, muhafiz, to mere memorizers of data, hafiz.
You know, I hadn't considered the hafiz versus muhafiz distinction in that specific light before. You're saying they essentially became human hard drives?
Right.
Storing the data without running the software.
That is a perfect way to put it. They memorized the texts, they knew the botany and the medicine, but they lost the profound unifying consciousness that birthed that civilization in the first place. When a botanist in Andalusia studied a plant, and he ceased to see the creator in that plant, when he merely saw biological data, the decay had already happened. The physical loss of the cities was just a delayed symptom.
But isn't that exactly my point? The decay happened because they stopped doing the work of protecting. The reason they became human hard drives rather than protectors is exactly because they decoupled their knowledge from physical societal action.
How does physical action protect meaning, though? Meaning is conceptual.
Because of how the text defines wisdom, or hikmet. And this is crucial. The text doesn't define wisdom as just sitting under a tree thinking unified thoughts. It defines hikmet as putting a thing in the exact place Allah intended for it. That is a very spatial, physical, active definition.
But it requires judgment.
Yes, but the ultimate expression is the placement. Look at the opposite. The text defines the opposite of wisdom as oppression, zulm, which literally translates to displacing something from its rightful place. You cannot put a thing back into its exact rightful place in society without an active physical mandate.
I agree that zulm is displacement, but
Let me just finish the thought, because this ties directly into the intention of the source material. The text explicitly warns us that this entire lecture series on the Asma-ul Husna is a change project. It is a transformation project. It requires intervention.
Right.
It requires standing up and saying, this policy is wrong, this injustice must stop, this resource belongs here. If wisdom is just about maintaining a living transmission of understanding in a private circle, how does that actually prevent the systemic displacement of justice in the real world?
I have to stop you there because framing action as the ultimate expression fundamentally misreads the architecture of this text. Have you considered that you cannot possibly know where a thing is supposed to be placed if you haven't first developed the holistic judgment to understand its purpose?
Of course you need some baseline judgment, but we already established they had the data.
Data is not judgment, though. You frame hikmah as primarily a physical intervention, but the text frames it as a cognitive and spiritual achievement. The material connects wisdom directly to the distinction between truth, which it calls haq, and meaninglessness or purposelessness, which it calls batil.
Right, haq versus batil.
Haq isn't just being factually correct. It means something is profoundly meaningful and perfectly aligned with its ultimate divine purpose. If you try to intervene in society without this profound internal realization, you are engaging in what the text calls malaliani, basically useless, meaningless work.
Okay, but if I stop a thief, that's not useless work, even if my internal spiritual state isn't perfectly unified.
On a micro level, perhaps, but on a societal level? If you don't understand the root of the theft, you just build more prisons. You think you are fixing the immune system, but you might actually be triggering an autoimmune disorder where the body attacks itself because it has lost the ability to recognize what is truly harmonious.
An autoimmune disorder. Okay, that's an interesting pushback.
The intellect itself is described in the material as a form of revelation. Quoting the great scholar Haris al-Muhasibi, the text says, "Reason is the Quran is reason." This deep cognitive integration is what allows you to place a thing in its rightful place. Without it, your action is just flailing in the dark.
I see why you emphasize that cognitive baseline. I really do. But the text doesn't leave us in the dark. It doesn't just say, go find wisdom. It gives us very tangible tools. Let's look at the specific mechanisms the material provides for reaching the divine.
The three means?
Exactly. It lists 3 true means, or wasile, to connect with God. First, the Asma-ul Husna, the beautiful names. Second, prayer. And third, righteous deeds, amali saliha. The text states unequivocally that anyone who invents a fourth way is placing themselves in the position of God. We have a strict, closed system of 3 means.
We agree on the 3 means.
But look at the progression. I argue that the first 2, contemplating the divine attributes and engaging in prayer, they are merely the preparation for the third, Righteous deeds are the execution. If you sit and contemplate the vast meaning of the universe, but you do not execute righteous deeds, you have failed the very mandate of the framework.
Preparation implies they are stepping stones you leave behind, though.
Not leave behind, but they are the fuel. The active goodness is the proof of the internal realization. If you are listening to this right now and you think you have achieved a deep understanding of justice through prayer and study, but you do not physically oppose the injustice in your community, your understanding is entirely theoretical. The text argues that if the good people had been active good, they would have stopped the bad people while they were still in their passive phase. They would have intervened before the decay became terminal.
If you are listening to this right now, you might be thinking, well, I volunteer, I donate, I am doing the active goodness. But the text asked us a much harder question. Are you doing it from a place of unified meaning, or are you just treating symptoms? You are treating the three means as a sequence where action is the final, most important stage. But the entire philosophical architecture is built upon the Asma-ul Husna as the absolute foundation, not just a stepping stone.
I'm not calling it a stepping stone. I'm calling it the blueprint. But you still have to build the house.
Let's use the material's own metaphor because it is breathtaking. The text says that Allah has laid down a channel, a wiring, from each of his infinite attributes directly into the human soul.
Right, like a wire for mercy, a wire for justice.
Exactly. It's like having a house fully wired for electricity. You have the wires for wisdom and compassion installed directly by the Creator. But, and this is the crucial part, it is up to the human being to put a lamp in the socket. It is up to us to actually illuminate that connection through profound internal contemplation.
Okay, but screwing in the lamp is an action.
An internal action. If you skip this step, you are completely disconnected from the divine power source. You can run around doing as many righteous deeds as you want, but you are operating an unplugged machine. You're just wandering around your house in the dark, bumping into the furniture, and calling the bruises righteous intervention.
That's a vivid image, but aren't you just proving my point? The light has to actually shine into the room.
The act of goodness you champion is completely blind without the illumination of the Asma-ul Husna. This is why the material insists on unifying knowledge. The modern world is full of fragmented, highly active people doing isolated good deeds, but society is still decaying because they have lost the unifying meaning of Tawheed.
I hear you, but this framework creates a massive loophole for perpetual passivity. It allows highly educated, deeply contemplative people to stay in their study circles indefinitely, forever claiming they are still, screwing in the lamp, while the world outside literally burns.
The text doesn't advocate for isolation.
It might not advocate for it, but your reading enables it. The text issues a severe warning to exactly this kind of person. It says if you are satisfied with your current state, do not even attend these lectures. It demands that we recognize our inadequacy, yes, but it immediately demands that this recognition fuels a change project.
The change project starts within the soul.
But it cannot end there. The speaker himself admits his own flaws in the lecture, noting he isn't fully at the center of wisdom. But what does he do? He is out there teaching, sharing, acting. The tragedy of our time isn't a lack of contemplation, it's a lack of courage.
Courage without vision is just recklessness, though.
We have millions of people who intellectually understand the concepts of justice and harmony. But when they step out into the world and see oppression, when they see things being displaced from their rightful positions, they do nothing. They retreat. Passive good people have no future. They are the enablers of the active bad. We don't need more people analyzing the wiring. We need people to flip the switch and start driving out the darkness through concrete, measurable action.
But flipping the switch is exactly what I am talking about. And it is an internal psychological process before it manifests externally. Let's revisit the Sobit tradition we discussed earlier. Why does the material argue that 1 hour of this knee-to-knee transmission is more valuable than reading 10 volumes of books?
Because it provides context for the data.
It's deeper than context. It's about 3 specific spiritual mechanisms mentioned in the text: inzabag, inzagap, and inakast.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let's slow down there because those are some pretty heavy concepts. You mentioned inzabag first, which translates roughly to being dyed with the color of Allah. Are we talking about taking on divine attributes ourselves? Like a piece of fabric absorbing dye?
That is exactly the right image. Think of a piece of raw wool being submerged in a vat of indigo. It doesn't just learn about the color blue, its fundamental nature is altered. That is inzibag. Then you have inzizab, which is the magnetic pull or attraction of divine truth.
So you're pulled toward the good naturally, rather than forcing yourself.
Precisely. And finally, inikas, which is reflection, becoming a mirror for those attributes. These are profound internal spiritual transformations. You cannot download these through action items or societal change projects. They require a human being to sit in the presence of living wisdom and be fundamentally transformed at the level of consciousness.
And if they don't?
If you rush into action without undergoing this inzibag, this coloring of your soul, you are just painting over rotten wood. You are projecting your own ego and your own fragmented understanding onto the world, and you are calling it justice. The reason good people become passive isn't because they lack courage. It's because they lack conviction, and conviction only comes from a deeply rooted, unified understanding of reality.
Let's follow that logic through to its conclusion, though. Let's say someone undergoes this deep transformation. They sit in the Soulwit, they experience this profound reflection and attraction, they understand Tawhid at a cellular level.
They become a true scholar, a muhafiz.
Right. Now, if they then go out and simply observe a society sliding into moral decay, if they observe the spread of what the text calls active evil, and they merely hold that pure meaning in their hearts without physically intervening, hasn't the entire process failed?
A true muhafiz wouldn't just sit there.
But that's exactly my point. The text notes that no one is born a villain. Every tyrant, every corrupt official, every architect of decay started as a baby on the Fitzrot. Then they became a passive good person, then a passive bad person, and finally an active bad person.
It is a tragic trajectory.
The intervention has to happen in the physical world to interrupt that trajectory. The active good must physically block the path of the passive good, turning into the active bad. It is a societal imperative. Knowledge, no matter how unified, is ultimately just fuel. And fuel is absolutely useless if you never start the engine.
Fuel is useless if you don't start the engine. I'll grant you that. But starting an engine with the wrong fuel or without a steering wheel is catastrophic. You keep treating action as the independent variable. The text asks, why did the Muslims lose Andalusia?
Because the white blood cells stopped fighting?
Because the system lost the ability to identify what was self and what was other. The moment the body cells lose the ability to accurately identify what is haq and what is batil, the system breaks down. That is exactly what happened historically, and it's what happens spiritually.
So you're saying action without unifying knowledge is exactly what destroyed them?
Yes. Action without unifying knowledge is precisely what the text warns against when it says a person can be a pedant and an intellectual, but not a scholar. When they stopped seeing the creator in the creation, their actions became disconnected mechanics.
I think we have fundamentally different readings of what it means to be a scholar in this context. You look at the scholar as the ultimate protector of meaning, the one who maintains the integrity of the database and the wiring.
The one who ensures the lamp is screwed into the socket.
Right, but I look at the scholar, based on this text, as the ultimate practitioner of wisdom. Hikmet is putting a thing in its place. A scholar who knows where a thing belongs but refuses to move it there is committing a form of intellectual treason. This is why the material stresses that the lecture itself is a project of transformation. It demands that we look at the world, see the oppression, the displacing of things from their divine intent, and use our hands, our voices, and our resources to put them back.
But you can't put them back if you are entirely disconnected from the source of the mandate. Let's bring this back to the Asma-ul Husna. The lecture makes it clear that we must look at the divine attributes, the all-seeing, the all-knowing, the wise, and trace how each of those attributes has a channel into our own souls.
We have to maintain the wiring.
If you don't do the arduous internal work of recognizing and clearing those channels, your actions in the world are disconnected from divine wisdom. You are essentially acting on your own whims, calling it righteous intervention. The text explicitly says that taking knowledge without its accompanying morality from a living scholar turns profound wisdom into mere data.
But morality is action.
Morality here isn't just doing good things. It is a state of being. It is having your internal compass perfectly aligned with the divine will through inzibag. If we want to prevent the next Andalusia, we don't need more activists running around blindly. We need more people who have screwed the lamp into the socket and can actually see where they are going.
I think we've reached the core of our divergence here. To summarize my position, while I do not dismiss the profound necessity of deep, integrated knowledge and the realization of divine attributes, those things are ultimately the prerequisite. They are the fuel for the engine of active goodness.
And an engine needs fuel.
Yes, but a society that rests on its laurels, that possesses massive intellectual and spiritual databases, but refuses to translate that into active physical intervention against decay, is doomed. The passive good are the true enablers of the active bad. Knowledge that doesn't manifest as concrete action in the real world is just a tragedy waiting to happen.
And to summarize my perspective, without the unifying framework of Tawhid, and without the genuine heart-to-heart transmission of meaning, human action is just aimless, chaotic motion. We cannot fix society by merely treating the symptoms of decay through frantic intervention.
We have to address the root cause.
Exactly, which is a crisis of meaning and a fragmentation of knowledge. The lamp must be screwed into the socket, and the soul must be illuminated by the divine attributes before the room can actually be lit.
It is clear from the source material that there's a deep convergence here, even in our disagreement. True spiritual realization ultimately demands both internal meaning and external action. The interplay between understanding the Creator through His attributes and actively fighting oppression in His creation, well, it offers a lifetime of exploration.
Absolutely. It is the tension between being the protector of meaning and the executor of justice. One cannot truly survive without the other.
Which brings us back to that grand structure we talked about at the very beginning. When you walk through the silent arches of a collapsed civilization, or examine the quiet ruins of a compromised soul, you have to ask yourself, did the roof cave in because the builders didn't know the laws of physics, or because no one bothered to actively repair the cracks in the foundation? Are you just holding a blueprint in the dark, or are you actually picking up the bricks?